His first brotherhood continued. Yerenda's slip. Father Athanasios exhausted Yerenda with his talking back and disobedience. Yerenda kept his grief to himself, however, and didn't tell me about it because he didn't want me to have bad thoughts about Father Athanasios. But one day, out of exasperation, Yerenda slipped and said something harsh to him. Even though Yerenda had reached high levels of grace, he was still human. To err is human, but God took into consideration Yerenda's labors and rewarded him with grace accordingly. After Yerenda said that, Father Athanasios left, and Yerenda sadly sat outside his cell weeping. Then I and one other father came out of our cells, and Yerenda said to us, "My children, I have committed a grave sin. Father Athanasios did this and that, and I got upset and said something that was like a curse. Please run and bring him back here." We brought him back, and Yerenda forgave him, said a prayer for him, and made the sign of the cross over him. Then he said to him, "See what you do to me? You make me say things I shouldn't. The Apostle Paul says, 'Bless and curse not.' You made me curse you." This incident gave me invaluable experience so that in the future I would know how to ask forgiveness even from my disciples. Of course, it isn't exactly proper to ask your disciples for forgiveness because you got angry, unless your conscience is bothering you. Even though this slip of Yerenda's was of a human one, he did not consider it trivial because he knew that unto whomsoever much is given, of him shall be much required. God had given him much, and therefore he would expect more from him. Yerenda taught us, "See how hard Moses toiled to deliver his people from Egypt, from slavery to Pharaoh, and to lead them to freedom. After so many years, so many scandals, so many labors, in the end he slipped, being human. He didn't attribute the glory to God when he worked the miracle of bringing water out of the rock. They kept nagging him. Who knows how much they yelled at him and how rudely they spoke. They made that meek person indignant. Afterwards God said to him, 'Why did you speak like that?' 'I have sinned,' Moses replied. 'Because of this mistake of yours, you will not enter into the promised land. Forgive me.' 'You are forgiven, but your penance remains. You will not enter the promised land. Climb this mountain and look at it from afar.' As Yerenda said this, he wept and added, 'See, after so many labors, he was kept out of the promised land for only one mistake, but God weighed the mistake based on his great gift as a God-seer. It was a great mistake for him after witnessing all the miraculous events in God's presence. If someone else had made this mistake, he would not have been kept out of the promised land. I worry that I too might not see the promised land of heaven because of getting angry with Thanasi." Divine protection. Because Father Athanasios was busy every day carrying supplies, he would return at odd hours. Yerenda built a tiny little hut for him outside their enclosure so that he wouldn't disturb the others when he returned. In this minuscule hut there was a wood stove and 2 planks for a bed. There was barely enough room left for him to do prostrations. When Father Athanasios would return from his errands exhausted, he would first fulfill his spiritual responsibilities and then fall asleep, flat on his face. While he was asleep, many times he would be touching the stove, which was lit in winter, but his clothes never caught on fire. God protected him. Once when he entered his hut to rest, he saw a viper. He indifferently said to it, "If you want to bite me," and then laid down to sleep. The viper left. This person lived miraculously. God's grace saved him. There were 3 cisterns, and one of them was used only for watering plants because the water was so filthy. Snakes and rats would fall in it, and later the fathers would pull out their skeletons. Even so, Father Athanasios drank water from there. The other fathers told him, "Don't drink that water, Father, it's dirty." He replied, "This is not what the rabid dog," referring to himself, "should drink. Nothing bad will happen to me." He drank water that the others were disgusted to use, even for washing their clothes. Once he went to the distant Gornoskiti because he wanted to get some grapes from the vineyards there. On his way back, he passed the ridge of Mount Athos and loaded himself with vegetables at Constantinitu Monastery. Then he took 2 other paths and gathered more provisions. Finally, he set off for his hut with a gigantic sack and various other bags hanging from his belt and arms. Not even mules were loaded up as he was. When he reached the port of St. Paul's Monastery, he saw a ferryman with his son and asked them, "Where are you going, Captain?" "I'm going to St. Anne's Skeet." "Can you take me along too?" "Sure." When he sat down in the boat, all sweaty with the sack still on his back, he thought to himself, "I had better not take off the sack because I'll catch a cold. I'll just leave it on my back." Since he was tired and sleepy, he soon dozed off. When the boat suddenly jerked, he fell into the sea along with his sack. Even though he had been in the Navy, he had never learned how to swim. "Oh no!" the ferryman's son cried. "Dad, we lost the monk. He's going to drown." "Oh no," the ferryman shouted. "We'll end up in jail." Fortunately, however, they were able to catch him with the oars and managed to lift him back into the boat. For the rest of the journey, he remained as he was, soaked with the sack still tied to his back. When they reached the port of St. Anne's, he went up to Yerunda as if nothing at all had happened. His battle with thoughts had already granted him deep self-reproach, which in turn gave him such a superhuman degree of self-denial that he disregarded everything. Hunger strike. As we've already mentioned, Father Athanasios had great difficulty in the warfare against thoughts. Sometimes this warfare became humorous. Once he lost his patience and said, "That does it. Since these temptations aren't stopping, I will die." "What are you going to do?" Yerunda asked. "I'll do a hunger strike. I won't eat anything until God takes my soul." "Go ahead," Yerunda told him. Let him do it," he said to Father Arsenios. Yerunda was a real general. With his keen discernment, he realized that trying to talk to Father Athanasios out of it would do no good, so he let him blow off his steam. For 7 days, Father Athanasios neither ate nor drank. He had a cane that he leaned on during church while holding his prayer rope, and the others were wondering how that skeleton was able to stand upright. 7 straight days without food or water, and he was still alive. He was extremely tough. After 7 days had passed, he could see that he wasn't dying. "Eat something, Father Athanasios," Yerunda said to him. "No, let this rotten old dog die." Yerunda thought to himself, "I'll fix you," and then shouted loudly to Father Arsenios so that everyone could hear, "Father Arsenios, make some cheese tigantes." This was one of our tastiest foods. He figured that aroma would conquer Father Athanasios. So Father Arsenios began frying them. The place filled with the smell of tigantes, and everyone's appetite grew. When they were ready, Yerunda let everyone have as much as he could eat. No one ate more than 2 or 3 tigantes because they were so large. Meanwhile, Father Athanasios watched the meat. Finally, he couldn't take the smell and the hunger any longer and said, "Ah, I'm not dying." "Well," Yerunda replied, "since you're not dying, you might as well eat. The tigantes are right here." "All right, I'll eat." Then Yerunda said, "All right, Father Arsenios, make some more for Father Athanasios, who's hungry." He began eating. He took 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Where did he put them all? His stomach had been weakened by fasting, yet he was able to eat so many tigantes. He was superhuman. "Hey," said Father Arsenios, somewhat annoyed, I'm not making any more. You're never going to get full. You already ate 7." Father Athanasios calmly replied, "If I opened my belt 1 notch, you'd have to make me another 7 tigantes." Father Arsenios abandoned the frying pan and the batter, saying, "Then you take the frying pan and the batter and make them yourself," and he got up and left. Old age. Even when Father Athanasios had grown old, he constantly worked extremely hard out of love in order to please his brethren so as to have a reward from our sweet Panagia. After our brotherhood moved to New Skeet, he remained there almost until the end of his life. Just before he died, when his health had deteriorated, Yerunda appeared to him in his sleep and told him to move to the holy monastery of Philotheu, where I was. There, at our monastery, A neglected injury opened a wound below his knee that eventually spread down to the bone. The fathers of Philotheu still remember that when Father Athanasios wasn't even able to walk, he nevertheless complained that they didn't give him some work to do. He shouted out to them, "Fathers, don't deprive me of the reward." The fighting spirit of Father Athanasios made him want to struggle even when he was immobile, so that he would not lose his reward in heaven. He was a great shining example for the other monks of the monastery. Many were humbled by his presence. Even now, so many years later, the fathers remember him for his asceticism and his heroic ascetical feats. Father Savas of Philotheu tried to clean the wound in order to give him a little relief from the pain, but the situation was horrifying. Little maggots were hiding in his putrid flesh, which were full of holes like a sponge. Oh, and how it reeked! Both he and his cell had an unbearable stench coming from the maggots in his putrid flesh because the gangrene in his legs had progressed so far. Despite this, Father Athanasios was patient without complaining to the very end. He left this world like a martyr. In 1983, I had to leave the Holy Mountain to take care of some business, and during my absence, Father Athanasios found the opportunity to return to his beloved old cell in New Skeet, the place where he had lived so many years as an ascetic and where his brother and elder had died. Even with that deep ulcerated wound, he still set off from Philotheu on foot. After walking only about a half an hour, he couldn't bear it any longer and fell down into the ravine, alone and helpless. The fathers searched for days before they found him. Then they informed me and asked me to come back to the monastery. I rushed back immediately and said to him, "Come, Father Athanasios, come back to the monastery." He had a soft spot in his heart for me and loved me very much. "All right, for your sake I'll go back. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't." "Where would you have gone? To my hut in New Skeet? You can't even drag your feet. You've been stuck here for so many days. If they hadn't found you, you would have died like a dog in a field. Come back to the monastery. We'll commemorate you and we'll do a 40-day liturgy for you. Stay in the cenobium so that you depart as a cenobitic monk. Yerunda will be very happy to see you like that." "Okay, I'll go back." The fact that he accepted and chose not to die while doing his own will shows what a true disciple he was. A few days later, he fell asleep in the Lord on September 11th, 1983, on the old calendar at the age of 76. He passed away as a disciple, as a cenobitic monk, without complaining about the horrible pain, and with deep humility like a saint. He went to meet his beloved elder and brother. He went to enjoy the fruits of his meritic labors and endless walks with burdens on his back. What did the abbess of the Holy Mountain, the Most Holy Theotokos, arrange in order to glorify him? 3 bishops were present at his funeral. Even when an abbot dies, 3 bishops don't show up for the funeral. Yet this is what our sweet mother, the Panagia, arranged for him. Recollections of Father Athanasios. Many old monks of the Holy Mountain still remember incidents and stories about Father Athanasios. One of the fathers of Philotheu Monastery recalled his last days with the following words: "I remember Father Athanasios as a true warrior and an ascetic of the same caliber as the ancient ascetics. I consider myself privileged to have met him and briefly lived with him at the holy monastery of Philotheu. It was a great blessing to have been one of the fathers who served him and was at his side during the last days of his life. He would never lie down to sleep. He would do his vigil and prayer all night, and when he tired, he would sit in a chair and rest his head on the sink in the narthex of the main church or anywhere else he happened to be in the monastery. That was his sleep. Even on his deathbed, he refused to lie down. Concerning the open wound on his leg, I could not believe his endurance to pain. Even though the ulcerated wound grew to about 3 inches in diameter and almost 1 inch deep, he never complained and refused any medical help. The last few days you could see maggots crawling around and disappearing into the flesh. And on the very last day, the maggots disappeared to be replaced by worms about 3/4 of an inch long. I couldn't fathom the pain he was in, and yet I never saw him show any external signs of pain or discomfort. Not even a grimace. On the day he passed away, we all went to his room to pay our last respects. As he never lay down to sleep for most of his life, what I saw and experienced I will never forget. He was sitting on the edge of the bed with his feet on the floor. His back was leaning against a plastic crate, with other crates on his right and left to serve as armrests to keep his body in a sitting position, and that is how he died. The presence of grace was so overwhelming. A deep stillness and extraordinary peace literally immobilized us as we looked at him silently and in awe. In those grace-filled moments, we wouldn't have been surprised if he were to look up suddenly and begin speaking to us. His first brotherhood continued other fathers. Father Ermolias. A monk named Ermolias was very simple and also went to Yerunda. Once he lost his watch and looked everywhere, but he couldn't find it. Hours later, Yerunda saw him very downcast and said to him, it doesn't matter, Ermolios, we can find you another one. Father Ermolios replied, I know we can get another one, but I'm sad because I dragged my guardian angel all over the place and tired him out. Sometimes when Yerunda wanted to have some fun, he would tease Father Ermolius a little. Once he asked him, Father Ermolius, do you know the modes? Me, of course. If it's in a regular mode, I keep my mouth regular. If it's a plagal mode, I hold my mouth sideways. The word for plagal in Greek can also mean sideways. Father Theoklitos. Elder Yosef's reputation as an ascetic attracted a scholarly monk, Father Theoklitos. Yerunda received him warmly, but right from day one, Yerunda began showering him with insults. How could anyone endure such treatment? One day at lunch, fish was served. Yerunda took some fish off his own plate with his hands and started distributing it to everyone. Immediately, Father Theoklitos, who was accustomed to the manners of high society, started having thoughts. How can I eat that fish with the sauce all over it? The others were accustomed to eating with their hands and ate it without a problem, but Father Theoklitos used his fork. Yerunda realized at once what kind of thoughts he was having and said, Father Theoklitos, this is how tumors are removed. Stay here and you'll see how they are removed. But how could he stay in a place like that? Already by the next morning he packed up his things and left. Later, Father Theoklitos said, how would I have been able to bear hearing people say that the scholarly Father Theoklitos has become a disciple of Elder Yosef and now carries a sack on his back? Problems and consolation. There were also other educated people, older people, who came to be the disciples of Elder Joseph. There was Father Eurasimos Menangias the chemist, Father Athanasios Campanaios, the doctor from the Great Lavra, Father Athanasios Balsamakis, the pharmacist, Father Ephrem, who later became a confessor in Volos, and others. In addition to the permanent members of the Brotherhood, many others frequently visited, while some stayed for a prolonged visit. Yerunda forced them all to do strict asceses. He would usually give them only one tin can of soaked rusks for their daily sustenance. He also made them follow the schedule of prayer that he himself followed, doing all the services with a komposkini and cultivating watchful silence. Time showed, however, that the rest of the fathers had great difficulty following Yerunda's lofty lifestyle. For example, once Yerunda asked one of the fathers, how did things go at night with your prayer? Did you have tears or any visions or theoria? Ah, the fleas ate me alive, he replied. Oh my, Yerunda said to himself, what kind of people do I have with me? Those prospective ascetics had great reverence towards Yerunda and good intentions, but their advanced age prevented them from following Yerunda's rules. Because of their weaknesses, they caused problems and asked for more leniency. On the one hand, they were somewhat justified, considering their age and Yerunda's level of ascesis. But on the other hand, they had chosen Yerunda as their elder, knowing that he followed the strictest type of asceticism in the wilderness of St. Basil's Skeet. As a hermit and hesychist, Yerunda did not give in at all to the demands of his disciples. Nevertheless, the situation grieved him deeply because neither was he benefiting them, nor was he able himself to follow his ascetical program comfortably with them around. This is why he told them, "Leave, fathers, go somewhere else. I can't govern you. I am a Hesychistic type of person, and I can't bear your burdens." They, however, in no way would ever consider leaving. This made Yeranda very sad. He had a burning desire to transmit to others the spiritual treasures he had found. But this cannot happen automatically like magic. A disciple must also exert himself accordingly. Yeranda's grief and sorrow for the spiritual weakness of his disciples were unbelievably intense. His grief is evident in his writings of those days. "I see my soul dead, and I moan over it. I suffer worrying about 9 souls that obstruct my path, for I bear responsibility for their souls and am in pain." In bygone days, monks were strengthened because they had much grace and good examples in abundance. He even had a vision in which he heard a voice saying, "What's the use of having the teacher in front of them if they don't listen to what he tells them? What's the use?" Thus he realized through his own experience why Elder Kallinikos was so reluctant to have disciples. Due to the hardship of ascesis, Yeranda's worn-out holy body had become sensitive to illness and toil. He was consoled by faith and prayer, but God allowed even these to weaken a little, which is when his sorrow culminated. Once when he was flooded by great sorrow because of all these things, as he was praying with tears and pain in the darkness of his cell, he came to Theoria, and everything around him shone with a supernatural light. Then he saw the living Lord nailed to the cross and bathed in uncreated light. From his blameless hands and feet blood streamed profusely. Then Christ tilted his head towards Yeranda and said to him, "Behold how much I suffered out of love for you. What have you suffered? Can you not endure a single affliction?" And then it was dark again. With those words, Yeranda's sorrow was dispelled, and he was filled with joy and peace. He shed rivers of tears, experiencing the love of God and amazed at the Lord's immense condescension. From then on, he had great consolation in his sorrow, torments, and trials. He grew strong in the Spirit, and in this manner was patient with those people until they decided to leave on their own accord. Father Gerasimos Menangias. Father Gerasimos was from a renowned and rich family in Athens, and he studied chemistry in Switzerland. In those days, the universities of Western Europe were required to teach atheistic evolution, thus his faith began to erode. Without God, it is said, everything is permitted. So, as a young student, he started partying and enjoying life. However, he contracted a deadly disease due to his unchaste lifestyle. Following his graduation, he got a job in Cairo of Egypt, where he became entangled with spiritualism, that demonic scourge. Nevertheless, God made something good come out of that encounter. Young Mr. Menangias realized that the spiritual world and demons do exist. He was so alarmed by this realization that he abandoned atheism and spiritualism, and he turned wholeheartedly to the gospel teachings of Christ. In 1920, at the age of 39, he went to the Holy Mountain and became a disciple of Elder Kallinikos the Hesychas in Katonakia. Unfortunately, though, Father Gerasimos was tormented by 3 incurable diseases. Since the climate there was not helpful, Elder Kallinikos sent him to St. Basil's Skeet in 1925, which was a dry and hesychistic place. Papu Yosef arrived there 3 years later in 1928. A few years later, probably in late 1934, a few other ascetics urged Father Gerasimos to see Elder Joseph. He went and confided his difficulties and his diseases to him. As soon as Yeranda heard his problems, he felt sorry for him and told him, "Stay here, I can help you." Father Gerasimos had a small suitcase with him. When Yeranda saw it, he asked, "What do you have in there?" "Medications, Yeranda." "Listen, you will become well immediately if you only believe that God is able to cure you. Throw all those medications and bottles and injections down the cliff." He said this to him because he could see that he was attached to his medications. "But Yeranda, I find that difficult to do," Father Gerasimos replied. Throw them all out and take what I give you, and you will get well. Yeranda, if I don't take these medications, I will die. I'll tell you what you need to take, and you'll get well. What should I take? Eat salted, unclean sardines, and instead of eating 10 times daily, you will eat only once. Despite Father Gerasimos' reasonable objections, Yeranda emphasized, you must put all your trust in God. You have to abandon your worldly medical knowledge and follow faith. And if I die, we have come here to die. Don't be afraid. But I can't. What else can I tell you? Either listen to me or go somewhere else in the morning. But Yeranda, you're the one who can make me get well. I told you, staying here requires two things, throwing out your medications and eating once a day. But Yeranda, that's impossible. Fine, as you wish, then leave. But I can't, Yeranda. Yeranda suffered greatly, trying to convince him, because neither would he leave, nor could he be persuaded. Thus, their first meeting was fruitless, because Father Gerasimos was thinking about things using his logic, since he had never learned the power of faith through experience. However, as soon as he went to his cell that evening, he saw a divine vision of an angel of the Lord urging him to be obedient to Yeranda. Do whatever he tells you, and you will get well. As soon as he heard the angel say this, he immediately ran to Yeranda and cried out, Yeranda, Yeranda, I will do whatever you tell me. I want you to be obedient to me from now on. Yes, Yeranda, may it be blessed. Yeranda immediately set the table and offered him 3 salty sardines, which Father Gerasimos ate along with the heads. Merely 3 days were enough for God to test him, because Yeranda was praying intensely for him. After 3 days, Yeranda had a vision at night that a dragon was wrapped around Father Gerasimos from his legs up to his neck and was trying to choke him. He was crying out in despair with wild cries for Yeranda to save him. Yeranda came out of the balcony holding a white dove in his right hand and said, Gerasimos, don't worry. This dove will come and kill the dragon that is now choking you. And that is exactly what happened. The dove went and struck the dragon's head 2 or 3 times and killed it. As soon as Yeranda regained consciousness after the vision, Father Gerasimos came and said to him joyfully, I have become entirely well. I have no words to thank you. All 3 diseases have left. Indeed, his flesh was renewed as if he were a small child. Following Yeranda's orders, he threw all the medications down the cliff. Thenceforth, he was free from all those diseases and ate only once a day. From then on, Father Gerasimos held Yeranda in great reverence, and Yeranda loved him as his own child. Father Gerasimos Menengias helped the Holy Mountain very much during the German occupation. Since he knew German, he translated a letter of the Holy Athenite community to Hitler himself, seeking protection for the Holy Mountain. They needed protection because the Bulgarians and the Italians were a great danger. In response to their letter, Hitler put the Holy Mountain under his own personal protection. Father Gerasimos was also a talented negotiator and diplomat, and he interceded with the Germans to deliver many fathers from certain execution. He also helped the fathers in Katonakia when they were in danger of starving to death by contacting the German governor in Karies and arranging for 9,000 pounds of wheat to be sent to Katonakia, which the ascetics distributed among themselves. When Father Gerasimos left Yeranda, he got sick again. He immediately returned to Yeranda and said, Yeranda, one of the diseases I had has returned. What thoughts did you have just before the disease returned? I was thinking, now that you have thrown away all your medications, what will you do if you get sick again here in the wilderness where there aren't any medications? That's it. The disease came back because of your lack of faith. Yeranda, please make me well, and next time I'll be careful not to disbelieve. No, it seems that it is God's will for you to have this cross. It is sufficient that you were healed of the other 2 diseases. Now you will be patient in order to have a reward. To find some relief from his disease, Father Gerasimos needed to go back to the world temporarily. He returned, however, and continued to live in the harsh wilderness with much self-denial and consistency. In 1957, Yeranda found out that Father Gerasimos had gone to St. Paul's Monastery and had reached his end. Yeranda immediately told one of his disciples, Get some rusks and take them to him and tell him that they are from me. When that disciple went, he told Father Gerasimos, "Elder Joseph sends you this." Gerasimos sat up in bed and said with amazement, "Who, my elder? Do you know what an elder you have? You are fortunate. I will never forget my stay with him. Those were the best days of my life. As long as I was near him, I was a real monk. As soon as I left Elder Joseph, I lost my monasticism." And with tears he added, "Give him my prostration." It is worth mentioning that despite the torments of his diseases, he lived an ascetical life with exceptional consistency and left noteworthy impressions throughout the holy mountain. Father Ephrem the Confessor in Volos. Another person who came to stay with Yerunda was a kind, tall young man whom Yerunda loved very much because of his considerate nature, his forcefulness, and his diligence in strenuous tasks. This is why he gave him the name of his elder of blessed memory, Ephrem, when he tonssured him a monk. Young Father Ephrem could not endure the ascetical diet of the Brotherhood. To remedy this problem, he frequently went to the monastery's feast day celebrations where they had good food and wine. Because of the hardships and difficult living conditions, he began to vomit blood. In those days, tuberculosis decimated the population. It especially affected people whose constitution was weak, such as the ascetics of the Holy Mountain. Aware of this, Father Ephrem immediately suspected that he had tuberculosis. As it turned out, he merely had a simple stomach ulcer, but he only discovered this later. When he started vomiting blood, he feared the worst and wanted to go back to the world to be cured. He even asked several neighboring fathers for their opinion, and they suggested that he go back to the world and to be taken care of, and then return the following week. Yerunda, however, did not agree because God revealed to him during his prayer that if he were to go out to the world, he would not return to the Holy Mountain. This is why Yerunda said to him, "What will never come to pass, but once you get there, you will break your promises to return." "But everyone goes and returns. Why will I be the only one to get stuck there? I spoke once and will not repeat myself. I assume no responsibility." Father Ephrem begged him because he placed logic above faith, but Yerunda would in no way consent. He said to him, "I made you a monk to be on the holy mountain. If you insist, do whatever you want, but you don't have my blessing. The responsibility will be yours." Yerunda even plainly revealed to him that if he were to leave, not only would he not return to the holy mountain, but he would end up dying in a distant foreign land, which is precisely what happened. But Father Ephrem, being human, was terrified by his symptoms and didn't listen at all. He insisted and finally made the decision to go out to the world, following his own will. Then Yerunda said to him, "By your own will you are going out to the world. I'm advising you not to go." But Father Ephrem didn't listen to his advice and set off to go. As soon as he was about 30 feet away, Yerunda suddenly felt as if the spiritual unity they had was severed. This was because he disobeyed him in a serious matter. As things turns out, Yerunda was completely right. Father Ephrem ended up going to Volos, where he was ordained a priest and led the local Old Calendar movement. He helped many souls, including me, with the ascetical spirituality he had learned from Elder Joseph. His church filled up with people, some of whom continuously wept out of compunction during the services. He also tried to establish a monastery in Volos, but he was unable to. Nevertheless, Yerunda did not stop praying for his disciple and writing him many letters. Yerunda yearned for his return so much that he always accounted for his share when taking care of their yearly supplies. He didn't even remove him from the official monastic roster of his brotherhood because he was still hoping that one day he would come back. Father Ephrem, however, wrote him letters trying to pressure him into removing him from their roster, probably so that he could be enrolled in the priestly roster of his diocese. Finally, in 1952, Yerunda removed him from the roster with a heavy heart. Even so, he shed streams of tears in his prayer, beseeching God for the return of his child. What happened next? Not even a month later, while Father Ephrem was living in Volos and benefiting many souls, suddenly a great trial befell him. An insidious enemy of the church slandered him so deplorably that his prestige as a priest was in danger. The situation evolved so quickly that he abandoned his flock and returned to the Holy Mountain in order to put an end to the scandals. In the meantime, however, Yerunda had moved from St. Basil's Skeet to the side of a cliff near this small skeet of St. Anne. Father Ephrem could not stay there because the place was very confined and lacked amenities. Thus he was forced to live down in St. Anne's Skeet with another brotherhood. He would come up to Yerunda and serve liturgy for him. One day the following unpleasant incident occurred. Yerunda was chanting the cherubic hymn in his own style very beautifully. He had a sweet voice. Father Ephrem, however, was reading the silent prayers out loud. Yerunda said to him, "Don't read them so loud, Papa. Say them quietly." As the Eretikon says they are supposed to be said. As a Hesychas, Yerunda wanted orderliness and stillness so that he could work on noetic prayer within. Father Ephrem didn't accept the correction well and retorted, "What about you, Yerunda? What kind of cherubic hymn is that?" He didn't realize, of course, that Yerunda had received his style of chanting from an angelic vision. Regardless, it was very ugly, improper, and impious of him to speak to his elder like that. As things turned out, Father Ephrem didn't stay long with Yerunda. He left the Holy Mountain and went to Montreal, Detroit, and Texas. In other words, things happened exactly as Yerunda had prophesied. Years later, after Yerunda's repose, he visited me on the Holy Mountain full of regret, reproaching himself as disobedient, and said to me, "I, the foolish Ephrem, left Yerunda and went back to the world like a dog to his own vomit, whereas you stayed beside him. You buried him and received his blessing and his grace and became a successor. Even while I was living in America, I saw Yerunda very frequently. He wouldn't embrace me and lovingly beg me to return. He would embrace me and lovingly beg me to return, but I didn't listen. Just imagine how much love and prayer Yerunda had. Even overseas, through the grace of the Holy Spirit, he majestically kept begging me to return. A little while later, he became ill with stomach cancer. Shortly before his death, with many tears and in great pain, he related the following vision he had in the hospital. I saw Yerunda in paradise, but between Yerunda and me was a great wall. We were speaking through a very tiny window. I said to him, Yerunda, Yerunda, let me also with you. Let me in. I can't, my child, he responded. Your disobedience is preventing me. After helping many people, Father Ephrem departed from this life with deep humility in 1984 at the monastery where Elder Joseph's niece was a nun. Father Basil with tuberculosis. When Yerunda was at St. Basil's Skeet, a young layman went to a nearby brotherhood to become a monk. The boy was an adopted orphan. Soon after his arrival there, his adoptive father came and said to him, I took you when you were young and raised you so that you would be able to take care of me in my old age, and now you want to become a monk? Then he took him by force and left. The boy was so upset that he got sick and later developed tuberculosis. Then his adopted father drove him away and said, Get out of here, don't make us sick too. Go to the holy mountain, become a monk since that's what you want. So he got up and he went again to the elder of that brotherhood in St. Basil's Skeet. When he arrived, he said to him, Yerunda, do you remember who I am? Yes, I remember you. My father gave me permission to become a monk. Fine. But Yerunda, I have to tell you that because of my great sorrow, I developed tuberculosis. That's why my father drove me away. What? You have tuberculosis and you've come here to give it to us? Get out of here, leave. But I don't want anything other than a crust of bread, and then you can leave me in the corner to die. Just make me a monk first. I don't want anything else. Absolutely not, replied that elder, and he drove him away. The young man left and just sat beside a path, sobbing inconsolably. By divine providence, Yerunda happened to walk by. He saw him and said, What's wrong, my child? Why are you crying? Yerunda, I came to the holy mountain to become a monk, but my elder drove me away because I have tuberculosis. Unfortunately, I can't find anyone who will make me a monk. I would be happy just to die in a corner somewhere, if only I could be made a monk first. Come along, my child. Yerunda said and took him by the hand and led him up to his hut. At that time, his brotherhood consisted of Father John, Father Ephrem, Father Athanasios, his brother, and Father Arsenios. When they found out that he had tuberculosis, they took Yerunda aside and said to him, He will give give it to us too. Don't say anything. God sent him to test me. So don't you say anything at all. I'll take care of him until he dies." So they built a little hut for him out of wooden planks. Yeranda took very good care of him. He went all over the place, begging people for figs, rusks, raisins, and olives to give his young disciple. After living with them for about 6 months, one day the young man said, "Yeranda, I see something like gypsy women. What are they doing around my bed?" Yeranda understood what it was, and he said to Father Arsenios, "Father Arsenios, get ready, he's reached the end. I will make him a great schema monk because he will leave this life soon." When they went to read the prayers over him in the church, Father Ephraim wouldn't go in. "Go in," Yeranda told him. "I'm not going in there because the doctor says he's extremely contagious." So they had to find some other priest to read the prayers. The only other fathers present were Yeranda, Father Arsenios, and Father Athanasios. After reading the prayers, they dressed him up and took him to his cell and left him in his bed. "My dear Basil," that is the name Yeranda gave him, "I'm leaving now to go say my prayers. I'll be back in 2 or 3 hours. Just keep saying the prayer constantly." After Yeranda had fulfilled his spiritual responsibilities, he ran back to see how Father Basil was doing. When he got there, he nudged him to wake him up, but there was no response. He had departed to heaven like an angel, wearing the great angelic schema. Yeranda was overjoyed that Father Basil went to heaven like an angel. "Come, fathers, let me serve you some treats. Father Basil's gone to heaven. Oh, my dear Panagia, a soul has been saved. Bring out the leukemia." Yeranda's joy was immense. He even started chanting, "Christ is risen." Afterwards, he dressed Father Basil in his full monastic habit and sewed him up in his raso as is customary. As he did this, he was saying, "Oh, my dear Panagia, I hope I will catch tuberculosis. I hope I will catch it." He was beseeching her to catch tuberculosis, but the more he prayed for it, the further it went away from him. The reason why he wanted tuberculosis so badly was because he called it a holy disease. He considered it sanctifying because it is a disease that gradually wastes you away, which means that you have time to prepare your soul for death. But since Yeranda didn't catch tuberculosis, he decided to burn all of Father Basil's belongings to protect the others from catching it. 3 days after Father Basil's repose, Yeranda saw him in his sleep. He embraced Yeranda and said, "My dear Yeranda, look at what you have made me. I'm an officer, a general full of medals and insignia." The repose of the nun Theodora. A few days after the repose of Father Basil, a letter arrived informing them that the old Yerondissa Theodora had also contracted tuberculosis and was on her deathbed. The letter said, however, that she was not going to let herself die until Yeranda came. "Oh, my dear Panagia," Yeranda said, "how am I going to go out into the world again?" He wasn't afraid of the tuberculosis, but he didn't want to leave the garden of the Panagia. Nevertheless, he took the boat to Thessaloniki, where she was. When he reached the house, he asked someone outside of it, "How is Theodora doing? Is she alive? Is she all right?" Eurondissa smells very bad because her illness is putrefying her flesh." As soon as she saw Yeranda, she arose and said to him, "Come in, Yeranda. I said that I wouldn't die until you came." "Don't worry, Theodora," Yeranda replied. He sat down beside her and said comforting things to her. "Yeranda, I can't take it any longer. I am in great pain. Theodora, be patient a little longer and it will all be over. God will give you crowns for your patience." "Yeranda, the whole room is full of crowns. I don't mind having one fewer." "No, my dear Theodora, you will get that one too. Patience, Theodora, patience." "Let me depart, Yeranda. Don't keep me here any longer. Let me go." She had so much faith in Yeranda that she believed that Yeranda had the authority of life and death over her. Later, Yeranda gave her something to eat. She chewed on it a little and then gave it back to him. Yeranda then took it and fearlessly ate it himself, saying, "O Panagia, may many germs come to me." However, he didn't get a single one. He later wrote about this incident, saying that death fled away from me to those who fear it. The next day, Yeranda was sitting beside Theodora along with Sister Ephraxia, who was taking care of her. They were both from Asia Minor. Yerondissa Theodora said something to her in Turkish, and then Sister Aphraxia left the room. Yerunda followed and asked, "What did she say to you?" "She said that visitors are coming. I figured that I should prepare some treats for them." "Forget about the treats and go tell the priest to come immediately because Theodora will be departing now." The priest came and everyone sat down beside Theodora, including some of other young nuns. Yorundisa slowly began looking at each person in the room one by one. Then she rolled her eyes, took 3 deep breaths, and flew to the heavenly abodes. After her burial, Yerunda returned to his beloved stillness on the holy mountain. Section 7. His First Brotherhood continued. Father Athanasios Campaneos. His background. Father Athanasios, whose worldly name was Spiridon Campaneos, was born in Aegina in 1867. He was a doctor and studied in Paris and Vienna. In 1898, at the age of 31, he renounced vain, worldly glory and went to the Great Lavra and was tonsured a monk 2 years later. Because he was very virtuous, he was soon chosen to be on the monastery's council of elders. He lived with great piety and consistency as a monk. He was renowned for his kindness, forbearance, and brotherly love. He read the writings of the Holy Fathers with insatiable thirst and tremendous piety. In fact, he himself founded the periodical Athonite library that Sotirios Skonias of blessed memory published in Volos. Through constantly reading patristic books, his desire for hermit's life grew. The problem was that he was getting old and was also overweight because of an illness. Nevertheless, the desire grew. Finally, around 1935, at the advanced age of 68, he learned of a great ascetic named Joseph in St. Basil's Skeet. As soon as he heard this, he collected his belongings, his money, his books, loaded them up on a donkey, took someone along as a helper, and set off for Papu Yosif up in St. Basil's Skeet. He said, "I am going to live as a monk under Elder Joseph," even though Elder Joseph was 30 years younger than he. When Father Athanasios arrived at St. Basil's Skeet, he saw Elder Joseph and said to him, "My dear Yerunda, I have come to live ascetically with you. O holy elder, I have heard about you." "You have heard wrong," Yerunda replied. "No, I'm staying with you." "Listen, doctor, you can't stay here. Things are very harsh. You're too old and overweight. I will try, and by God's grace I will succeed." "There's no possible way you will manage, doctor." "Yes, I will. I'm staying." It seems that Father Athanasios remembered the story of Paul the Simple, who with his great persistence managed to persuade St. Anthony the Great to keep him. This is why he kept saying, "I'm not leaving." "What got into you that made you want to come to me? Why don't you just stay in your lavra, where you have plenty of comfort, honor, and respect? Besides, you are on the council of elders. So go back and help some people. I have come to be an ascetic and save my soul." Now, in your old age, you want to become an ascetic? You won't be able to stay here. I will stay with Elder Joseph. Life is strict here, doctor. You won't be allowed to talk. Nanavligimeno, may it be blessed. Fine, stay, you may try. Fleeing to the mountain. In those days, Father Gerasimos Menangias and Father Athanasios Balsamakis, the pharmacist, were already with Elder Joseph, and he constantly told him, "What did you come here for? Why don't you go to the other monasteries? You can't survive here. Through your prayers we're staying. If you stay here, you will have to keep your mouth shut. No idle talk at all. This is no place for discussions. Only silence and the prayer. Can you do that?" "We can." "If I ever catch you talking, you will all immediately leave." No, we will force ourselves to be silent." We'll see about that." It turned out that all 3 of them were scientists and distant relatives, so they had a lot in common. After only 3 days, Yerunda caught all 3 of them talking. "Doctor, didn't I tell you?" "I'm sorry." "Get up and leave, all of you. Just think of that idle talk. Doctor, didn't you say that you could be silent and live ascetically?" My dear Yerunda, this is a hard saying. Who can hear it? If you can't take it, go back to your monastery. There's silence here. No, thou hast the words of eternal life. To whom shall we go? You shall go to your monastery. You can't stay here. We're not leaving. We chose you as our elder. Father Arsenios jumped into the argument, saying, Yerunda, they're making no progress. They're old and aren't going to change. Let's get out of here. As soon as he said that, he grabbed Yerunda's arm and started pulling him. The scientists grabbed his other arm and started pulling him towards them. Yerunda was stuck in the middle of a tug-of-war. Yerunda's ours, shouted the scientists. Yerunda's mine, shouted Father Arsenios. He's ours. He's mine. And they kept pulling. Hold on. You're going to pull my arms off. Who knows how, but somehow Father Arsenios won. So he and Yerunda took off for the summit of Mount Athos. After climbing and climbing for hours, night began to fall. The fog became so dense that they couldn't see where they were stepping. Then Yerunda said to Father Arsenios, let's stop around here somewhere. If we don't, we'll fall down some cliffs, since we can't see anything. No, let's keep walking, Father Arsenios objected. Stay here, we'll fall down a cliff. May it be blessed. So they stayed there all night, out in the open air near the summit. The cold was so intense that their clothes were frozen stiff. What could they do? They had to do prostrations all night to stay warm. When day broke, they saw that they were indeed at the edge of a cliff hundreds of feet high. If a rock had broken loose, they would have fallen down and been killed. But Yerunda, with the clear eyes of his soul, was enlightened to stop there. Apples from the Panagia. When they arrived at the chapel of the Panagia, which is 1,650 feet below the summit, the entire chapel was fragrant, with the smell of 2 huge bright red apples that were in front of the icon of the Panagia. They even had fresh green leaves on the stem, as if they'd just been picked. As soon as Yerunda saw them, he said, Father Arsenios, since this is February, where did these fresh apples come from? It would have been impossible in winter time to find fresh apples with soft green leaves, especially so far up the mountain. Realizing what a miracle it was, they immediately fell down before the icon of the Panagia with tears and thanked her for the heavenly gift. As they began eating, they fell into ecstasy due to the apple's paradisical sweetness. Their noose opened, and they just looked at each other in awe. The Master of Heaven had taken care of his faithful servants. This is what happens to the great ascetics. Later, Yerunda said, I still remember their taste. I can't forget it because I never had such wonderful apples. After staying 5 or 6 days, they had to leave because the cold was too harsh. Father Arsenios said, let's go down to help the brethren to be patient. It's in God's hands. If it's His will for them to leave, they'll leave. So they took the remaining pieces of those apples and brought them to the fathers back at St. Basil's skeet. As soon as they saw Yerunda coming down, they ran and fell at his feet. Father Athanasios Campaneos cried out, O Yerunda, Yerunda, you abandoned us, and we didn't know what to do. We were like the Israelites, who were waiting 40 days for Moses to come down from the mountain and bring them the tablets of the covenant. Then Yerunda said, Go on, doctor. Go to the Lavra because things are tough here. I'm not leaving. Kyrie eleison, I just can't get rid of them. He tried to drive them away, but they wouldn't leave. They had great reverence and love for Yerunda, but they were unable to follow his uncompromising ascetical program. It's not as if it were easy. That ascetical duo, Father Arsenios and Elder Joseph, was a rare phenomenon. They were high-flying eagles. Thus life went on at St. Basil's skeet, and they waited for God's solution to their situation. Returned to the Lavra. It wasn't long before the fathers from the great Lavra came and said to Father Athanasios, Doctor, you are not meant for this place. You are a member of the Council of Elders. You are a doctor with so many degrees and awards, and you came here to become a disciple of this unlettered ascetic? Come back to the Lavra. You are such a useful person there, whereas here you're not doing anything. In your old age, can you do the same ascesis that the fathers are doing? Finally, they took him back to the Lavra by force. He left in tears because he had so much faith and love for Yerunda. Soon after, Father Athanasios returned to the Lavra. He acquired 2 disciples and arranged for their ordination to the diaconate. Since the Lavra was an idiorhythmic monastery, every elder could have 1, 2, or 3 disciples. In this manner there were several small brotherhoods at the Lavra, each living cenobitically. Apparently his monks were not confessing their thoughts frankly, because both of them left and went back to the world. Thus the doctors were all left alone. So he went up to Yerunda to tell him his plan. He said to him in full grief, "Oh, my Yerunda, my holy Yerunda, what's wrong with you this time, doctor?" "Yerunda, my disciples have abandoned me." Yerunda, who was a masterful at giving the right kind of spiritual advice, said in order to humble him, "My dear doctor, listen to what I'm going to tell you." "What will you tell me, Yerunda?" "You aren't merely unworthy to shepherd men, you aren't even worthy to shepherd baby chicks." And Father Athanasios, a joyful, chubby, pious, humble person, chuckled and said, "Ha ha, my dear Yerunda, I can't easily accept those words, you know. I've lived abroad, I've obtained degrees, I have received awards, I have studied in the library of Vienna, the library of Paris, the library of the Great Lavra, the library of Simenopetra, and nowhere have I seen those words. You'll hear them from me, since I know you. You are useless. You aren't even worthy to shepherd baby chicks." Then the doctor lowered his head and went back to the Lavra humbled and ashamed. From then on he never again bragged about his degrees and awards. Thus, with his successful operation, Yerunda cut out the little cancerous growth of pride in his soul. A few years after Father Athanasios returned to the Lavra, he went to see his mother in Aegina. He was rather overweight. He was getting old. His mother was simple and uneducated, and she only knew how to interpret the gospel literally. As soon as she saw how large he was, she said, "I don't know how to read, my child, but I have heard our priest say in his sermons that the Bible says that the door to the kingdom of God is narrow and small. You're so fat, my child, how are you going to make it through?" "Mother, dear mother, the water on the holy mountain is fattening," he replied. The next time he saw Yerunda, he said, "Yerunda, I was able to fool my mother, but how will I be able to settle things with God?" Nevertheless, he was a very holy, pious, and humble monk. It was rare to have such virtues, considering his worldly education and glory. He was very tender-hearted and helped many people by his example and edifying words. As a member of the Lavra's Council of Elders, he also helped Elder Joseph and other ascetics with the various issues that concerned them, because many skeets and huts were dependencies of the Great Lavra. When they came to the Lavra's Council of Elders with their problems, he would say to the other members of the council, "Come on, fathers, we have our Lavra, our dependencies, our belongings, and we are not in need of anything. This monk here is just a poor, needy ascetic. What do you say, fathers? Should we help him? Is it blessed? Yes, all right, my child. With the Panagia's blessing, do whatever you need to do." He completed this monologue while the other members of the council just stared quietly at him, dumbfounded. Father Athanasios's golden heart was evident from the way he handled the trial of someone who had committed arson in one of the Lavra's forests. After the arsonist was arrested and was in danger of even receiving a lengthy prison term, he appeared before the council of elders to defend himself. They asked him angrily, "Hey, you, why'd you burn down our forest?" "I'm sorry." Then Father Athanasios got up and said, "Come on, fathers. Since he said sorry, we have to forgive him. Isn't that right, fathers?" Yes, all right. Get along now, my child, you're forgiven." In this manner, Father Athanasios took care of things just fine. Thus the poor man was not punished, and the temptation was dispersed. Holy repose. Elder Joseph loved Father Athanasios very much, and he constantly kept him in his prayers. One day in 1940 he had a vision that the doctor was going on a big trip and would not return. The fathers were bidding him farewell outside the monastery gates. Across from him was a river with a bridge crossing it. After Father Athanasios said goodbye to all the fathers, he crossed the bridge. On the other side he turned around and did one last full prostration to all of them while saying, "Forgive me, fathers." Behind him was a golden gate. After he passed through it, it closed once and for all. It was the gate of the kingdom of heaven. As soon as this vision ended, Yerenda said to his brother, the other Father Athanasios, "Quick, go to the Lavra. Father Athanasios, the doctor's leaving. Hurry. Bid him farewell on my behalf." When Father Athanasios arrived at the Lavra, Father Athanasios, the doctor, was still alive, and he told him about Yerenda's vision concerning him. Since Father Athanasios, the doctor, had great faith and reverence towards Yerenda, he accepted the vision as a revelation from God, and he prepared himself accordingly. Indeed, after 3 or 4 days, tender-hearted Father Athanasios Campaneos fell asleep in the Lord to enjoy the fruits of his great kindness and eternal life.